Welcome to the One Within, all to another episode of InnerVerse. I'm your host, Chance, and as the dust settles on this winter's first major snowstorm, at least where I live anyway, the frigid standstill of nature's life processes brings into sharp relief just how magical and mysterious that generative power and ordering principle of the cosmos truly is. In a society of reductive unreasoning that tries to crack open whatever it examines to find smaller and smaller constituent parts, even down to the fictional or hypothetical atomic particles, and somehow the yet smaller components that our vaunted experts have imagined, the words of my personal spirit guide and favorite wizard Gandalf come to mind. He that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom. And despite all the myths of mankind's inexorable progress over the ages, the ancient sages were far more advanced and knew how to reduce a substance without ruining its properties. In alchemical crucibles and blacksmiths' forges, the investigations of nature and its material manifestations attempted to exalt, rather than extort, the virtues of every plant and mineral that they brought into their laboratory. These are the ideas swimming through my mind as we embark on a second round of enlightened banter with the great alchemical author, audiophile, and elemental tecton, Steve Young, a PhD physicist turned shamanic scholar and audio alchemist, known by his musical moniker, Hedflux. In our last chat with Steve back in September of 24, we embarked with him through the first half of his book, A Fool's Wisdom, disassembling the pseudo-scientific Tower of Babel and slaying the various boogeymen that reside on each level of fictional foundations, from the nihilistic atomists and heliocentric hexers, all the way up to the nuclear bomb-fearing numpties. In today's episode, we'll begin what may be a multi-show discussion on the second half of his excellent tome about the wondrous principles of alchemy and their fractal expression through all dimensions of scale in the creation, with an emphasis on the quintessential elements as a universal language of generative potential. And just depending on how deep we go through that unlimited treasure trove of truths, we've got a lot more avenues to explore beyond. So check the show notes for links to Steve's music, his book, his new YouTube channel, and all the ways you can support InnerVerse while getting extended and exclusive, very exciting content. And a big thanks to all the members who helped this podcast grow. I love y'all. So also, if you didn't catch Steve's last appearance, do yourself a favor. Go check that out once we finish this one. And with that, let's do it. Everyone welcome the headsman at the chopping block of a condemned and fake scientism, teacher of tones and seeker of the philosopher's stone, Steve Young, a.k.a. Hedflux. Thanks for coming back, man, and welcome to InnerVerse.
Wow. Thank you, Chance. That was awesome. And I love that little quote from Gandalf that you dropped in there as well, about breaking a thing to try and find out what it is.
I mean, doesn't that just define modern science?
It's brilliant. Yeah, I don't even remember that quote from Gandalf. Is that in the movie?
I think that's in the movie too, but it's my top favorite amongst many Gandalf quotes. I mean, there's a reason I claim him as my spirit guide.
Good stuff. Well, thanks for having me back, and congratulations as well. You had a baby, I believe.
Oh yeah, that was after we talked.
Yeah,
life's good. I know you've got a few. I'm hoping to catch up.
Yeah, welcome to fatherhood.
It's the best. I mean, there's nothing more exemplary of the alchemical crucible than the mother, the maiden becoming the mother. Holy crap.
Yeah. And the commitment to marriage itself. I mean, we talk about the alchemical marriage in the book. And I thought it was, when I first heard about it, I was thinking it's something kind of chemical related. The word marriage is just being used as a kind of like metaphor or whatever. But the more I looked into it, I realized, no, it's what marriage is. Like marriage is an alchemical marriage, when it's done properly, is the perfect sort of union of the masculine and the feminine embodied in the human form.
Yeah, don't you think maybe the marital problems of modernity might stem from the fact that it's no longer really a union of opposites for a lot of people, that men are feminized and women are trying to be men, and you put that together and it's like null and void, or it can be.
Yeah, it's become sort of hyper individualized. And I think atomism, I've talked about this, but atomism kind of leads to that in a way. And when I was looking back to the ancient Greek origins of atomism, it does all go back to Epicureanism, and Democritus was called the laughing philosopher because he just liked to laugh all the time because laughing felt good, right? It was all about pleasure seeking and pursuit of happiness and the elimination of fear, which can sound good, it can sound good at first, but can also lead to, lack of moral duty, and sort of the rejection of sin, the idea that there's any sin or there's any consequences for actions. So, yeah, when you look at these early atomists, that's really where they were coming from. They wanted to reject sin, reject moral duty, reject God, reject spirit, and this atomic theory was really like their sort of attempt to, I guess, formalize those beliefs into a scientific worldview.
Yeah, that's super interesting because it's not a take I've ever heard where anybody ever bothered to go at the actual original atomists. And I think there's probably some baby in that bathwater that's not needed to be thrown out. Like, pleasure as a principle in and of itself is not, in my opinion, wrong, but it's when it's at the extent of, or the expense of, duty and moral rectitude that, of course, things get ugly.
Yeah. So, when you go back to like the ancient sources, because there was basically an atomic revival in the like 1700s, right? And when we're sort of in the end of that now, I would say. But they tell us that it was an ancient Greek idea. Now, there's like 4 figures that they attribute it to, and the founder, as it were, the father, the first ever person to like come up with the idea of atoms is called Luciferus, and there's no surviving records of his writing. It's pretty sketchy. A big question as to whether or not he really even existed at all. But apparently his student was Democritus, who also has no surviving writings or any proof that he existed. But Democritus was called the laughing philosopher. And from Democritus, it goes to Epicurus, which is where we get Epicureanism, which is a whole philosophy based around hedonism and seeking pleasure and so on. And then finally, there was a Roman author, the name I've lost the name now, but there was a Roman author just before Christ, about 100 BC, 50 BC, maybe something like that, who then revived the Greek atomists. But the question is, if there's no surviving documents from those early Greeks, then did the Romans just make it up and write these Greek atomists into history? You got to be aware of things like that. But we do have lots of writings from Aristotle, and he was very much opposed to atomism, and he wrote extensively on the 4 elements and the ether. And this was actually the standard scientific paradigm worldwide for like 2,000 years, until the atomic revival of the 17th century.
There's so much tomfoolery going on in that so-called Enlightenment era, where and a little before the humanist movement in Italy, where so many of the texts from ancient authors that are just taken for granted as authentic and true are of extremely sketchy provenance, where the Pope was offering a bag of gold for anything old that was philosophical or religious in nature. And there's lots of forgery going on. We've Dylan and I have covered that in the past. But let's start the talk on alchemy from where you begin it in your book with the following statement. Unlike the theoretical jargon of academia, which deals in abstract models and postulated particles, a la atomism, alchemy deals with real sensory phenomena and practical creative knowledge, the kind of science you can apply at home in your own way for the benefit of your health, wealth, and that of your family and community. Can you expand on this?
Yeah, sure. So I say, when I came at alchemy, like reading books on alchemy and stuff, now there's a lot of it which you don't understand. Just like reading the Bible, right? You understand some of it, but then there's other bits they just go over your head. Yeah, it was like that reading through the alchemy. I didn't understand all the symbolism, but what I could understand was the physical framework that they operate from, like the physics of alchemy, if you like. And I was able to discern from reading these books that they follow this belief in the elements and the ether, and that it's a very advanced and sophisticated understanding of these elements. And of course, none of it I was taught at school or at university at all. So it was very fresh when I came to it. It also just made sense because, well, fire makes sense, right? Water makes sense. Earth makes sense. They're all sensible elements, and they are, we can sense them, we can measure them, we can build with them and work with them. So again, coming from the theoretical background, this just struck me as being sort of eminently practical, but also having like a beautiful theoretical framework as well, which we see in like the Tetractys and things like this. There is this sort of elegant theoretical framework there. Now, at the time, I didn't know this was all Aristotle. This is all basically Aristotelian physics, because I hadn't read Aristotle. So I was reading Alchemy, and I'm interpreting the physics, their view of the world, and I'm calling it alchemy. But I'm also finding out now that it's Aristotle. It all goes back to Aristotle. And there was like 2,000 years of Aristotelian physics that was just worldwide and known by everybody. And they worked with the elements, and the elements were honored. And this is why we have blacksmiths and, all this wonderful ancient monuments and everything. The whole idea of scientific progress is actually a myth, right? The idea that like we've understood, we've had better theories, which have led to developments in technology and developments in medicine, developments in society, and we're now far more advanced than we used to be. Like that whole thing is just a myth. And we've had advancements in technology, but the advancements in technology are not due to advancements in theoretical science. They're actually due to engineering excellence and doing things over and over again and building machines to doing things and better machines and so on, right? There is an improvement in technology, but as far as I could tell, it's not based on any new science, right? The science has always been the same. So to come back to your question, so the more I started looking at this alchemical view, fire, earth, air, and water, and this transmutation and how to mix and transform things, it just started to help me understand everything. Of course, I applied it to music, but we do stuff at home as well. My wife makes hydrosols and balms and all kinds of things, just taking material from nature, whether it's herbs from the garden or whatever it is, and then subjecting it to a series of processes. You could be drying it, you could be dissolving it, you could be combining it with other things. You can be fermenting. I mean, there's lots of there's 7 different processes, right, in alchemy, and you can do them all. You can do just a few of them, but either way, you're taking something from nature and you're making it more potent, making it better, stronger, or transmuting it into a new form that is, beneficial in some ways. So I just find it very empowering from a guy who was mainly a very theoretical guy. It was all theory that I'd done, maths and everything. And I couldn't really find a way to apply it other than through music. But when I learned alchemy, I realized I can do everything, all the chemistry stuff and everything as well. It all makes sense. It's all rooted in alchemy.
Lots there. I'll start with just quoting one of my favorite authors, Godfrey Higgins, in Anacalypsis. He touches on this more than once, but essentially his idea is that all the mistakes of moderns arise from inattention to the philosopher Locke's unquestionable doctrine that man can possess no ideas which he does not receive through the medium of his senses. I mean, everything spirals out from there. Whether it's metaphysics or particle physics, they're actually no different. It's a type of misguided mysticism, you could say. And then when it comes to alchemy, you're talking about these different 7 processes to bring out the virtues of whatever the substances are that are being worked with. I love that the idea behind alchemy is exalting what nature has already done, just bringing that human creative consciousness to it to just improve it a little bit, make it a little bit more effective and efficient, purify it. Where pharmakia is the mixture of different things and creating sort of occasionally quite abominable combinations that would never exist in nature. And I think that there's a place for a type of pharmakia. There's blending of different leaves to make a tea. You're not really going too far out of the bounds of how nature operates to do that. But ultimately, alchemy is not really about mixing and combining. It's about refining and purifying and exalting. I think that that's a key distinction that is where alchemy stays more aligned with nature than other so-called sciences, where a lot of what they're studying are things that don't exist in nature that they've combined or concocted for themselves,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the alchemists would say that nature can only take things so far, and then man has to help take it to its fullest expression. So, I mean, a good example might be like clothes. It's a great example. Cloth is sacred, right? Because the fiber is made by nature, but then it takes human beings to spin and weave it into fabrics, which we can use for, our dignity and style and so on. So yeah, cloth is a good example, and it's kind of a sacred thing. It's sort of an everyday thing, but also a really sacred thing. I think what would we do without it? It's man-made, but it's also made in collaboration with nature.
So I want to also touch on the core of all mysteries, in my opinion, the generative power itself. Can you speak on what alchemy has to do with the generative power, the most mysterious of mysteries? Why there's a something instead of nothing? How a womb forms a life? There's, I think, so much to alchemy that is an investigation into that mystery.
Yeah, well, the fire element would be the element most associated with the generative power. You've probably heard of the spirits associated with each of the different elements, right? The spirit associated with the fire element is a salamander, also a dragon. So you might find there's like two. So because the elements have like a dual nature, like a positive and negative nature, and so with the fire element, it's represented by the dragon and the salamander, which are both. I mean, the salamander is kind of a reptile-like thing, like a dragon, but obviously it doesn't breathe fire, doesn't have wings. It's not very menacing. It's like this cute little sort of reptile. But what does it do? It can regenerate all its limbs and organs, right? It actually embodies the generative principle. You can cut it in half or whatever, and it will generate the rest of its body back. So the salamander represents the generative principle of fire, and the dragon represents the destructive power of fire.
Wow. And I never really put that together. The salamander and its regeneration being why that symbol was chosen to represent, or that animal represents the fire element. That's super cool.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the only thing I could find, because it is strange at first. You're like salamander. What does a salamander have to do with fire? But yeah, it's unique in its ability to regenerate any of its like limbs or organs. So it's sort of embodies the generative principle.
And they kind of seek the warmth too, being cold-blooded. They seek the fire, you could say.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the fire is called the Great Mover, and it's, it penetrates everything, even, insulated materials. The fire, the heat will actually seep through eventually, even if it's very slow and only in very small amounts. But they say in alchemy that fire penetrates everything, all substances and all other elements. And because it can do that, it actually like causes things to move, causes things to change. It's like the and we know ourselves, if we take away the fire, if we take the temperature down, then everything just becomes frozen still, right? There's no life at all. So the fire element is intimately tied with the generative principle. Yeah.
Well, is there more we could say about the actual steps of alchemy in correspondence to the generative power? Or as a sort of a representation of that fractal process as it exists across all of nature's dimensions of scale?
I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, we have like all of these stages, Negredo, Albedo, etc. And they all most of them have something kind of to do with fire, actually. Are those steps, in your opinion, derived from something that we would observe happening in nature?
Yeah, I mean, Negredo, well, the reduction of a substance to black ash would be the Negredo, which symbolizes the removal of all the, well, maybe not all the impurities, but all the most subtle impurities, all the essences as well are just like gone, right? And you have what's left is this black ash, which we know if we burn something. But if you continue to heat the black ash, if you continue the heat for longer, the black ash will eventually turn into a white ash, which is the whitening. And in alchemy, yeah, those represent mental processes or psychological processes. So the Negredo could be like a really challenging time in life, like the dark night of the soul, when you're just being like criticized and challenged, and there's a lot of like fire coming your way, a lot of heat coming your way, a lot of hate coming your way, for example.
Whereas hate. Never thought about
heat
that.
And hate. Yeah,
your accent helps with that recognition.
Yeah, hate is a type of fire, and like all fire. I mean, it is purifying. It does cause you to maybe let go of things you needed to let go of, or look at yourself. See yourself in a clearer way. But yeah, it's all fire. I mean, everything that comes through our screen is fire. Everything, the LEDs, like the electricity going into the computers, like it's all fire. And we are sort of masters of fire as human beings.
I'm going to bring up this graphic so we can start talking about all the elements in context with each other. Let me just make it big. There we go. Should have had this ready. Okay. So I grabbed this out of your book. I thought this was really helpful to comprehend the qualities and traits of the elements here. Can we touch on, this as a way to help us understand too, the difference between actual elements versus the periodic table of elements? I know we've talked about atomism a little bit, but if atomism and its molecular model is not an accurate description of any legitimately existing particles, on top of considering these elements, what's going on with those alleged 118 pseudo elements? It's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah. Well, again, going back to Aristotle, so his objection to the atomic theory was, he said that matter is continuous. Matter is not made up of tiny little pieces. It's actually continuous, and it's infinitely divisible. So there's no smallest part. So that just pulls the rug out from under atomism and quantum physics right away, because they have no response to that. Like they say there is a smallest part, right? A smallest particle or a smallest length, the Planck length. But you can just say, no, there isn't. It's infinitely divisible all the way down. There's no smallest anything. No smallest anything. Yeah, that's really important to understand. There's no proof that there's a smallest anything. So anyway, and the other opposition to this is Aristotle emphasized the importance of qualitative analysis over quantitative analysis, or quality over quantities. And so with the elements, it's all about qualities, right? The properties of the elements are what's important, not necessarily the quantities. But with atomic physics, it's all about quantities, like how small is the atom, how many of them are there? What is the energy of the atom? What the energy? It's all like quantitative work. But when you come back to fire, earth, air, and water, it's really about the qualities. And so fire is hot, dry, and air is said to be hot, wet, or technically warm, wet. Of course, air can be cold or cool as well. But we have earth is cold, dry, and water is cold, wet. So These all can all mix with each other, of course. So you can heat the water, and the water will become hot water. And then if you heat it enough, it will become steam, which is like hot air. So these can all be like mixed together in different ways. But these are the essential qualities that are universal, that we all experience as human beings. But as I say, even animals or children understand the difference between like hot, wet, and dry. Hot, cold, and dry, wet.
So with this quaternity here, are there other layers of consideration when we're looking at like natural materials? Because I'm thinking of how crystals and minerals can express the entire range of colors, and how we might better understand what it is that constitutes the difference between one mineral or another, whether it's something simple like lead or more complicated like a weird laboratory creation, high ranging number on their periodic table. Does that make sense? Are there other sort of qualities, or are all these qualities, including the color spectrum and sort of like energetic resonance, emotional energy resonance, the different materials can have, are these somewhere in the spectrum of this quaternity of the four elements?
Yeah, I mean, they'd be defined by their qualities, essentially. Most of the elements are earth, because they're solid, right? They're solid and dry and cold. But some of and we're talking about the chemical elements. Some of them are gases. Okay, so you've obviously got your noble gases, helium and hydrogen, and everything else, argon, krypton, and that. And those are really sort of identified by their color as well. They all obviously have unique colors that they glow when you put electricity through them. So, yeah, most of the chemical elements are earth. In fact, I think the only liquid one would be mercury. Is that right? I think mercury is the only liquid element on the periodic table. So, yeah, there's some gases and there's some earth. But the periodic table is like a categorization of substances based on their density. They say it's the atomic weight or the atomic mass, but if the atomic mass is a non-observable quantity, it's like calculated from the density, which is the observable quantity. So it's effectively a table based on density. And they've defined the elements as purified substances. Now, the original definition of elements is not a purified substance. Like water generally is not a purified substance. Air and earth, they all have impurities in them. They can be purified by fire, but they're not inherently pure. They in the form that they come in nature, they're usually impure. So they're readily available natural resources, but they're not pure. Generally, not pure. Whereas the purified chemical elements, these are all created through transmutation of the elements. So a good example is hydrogen and oxygen. So hydrogen and oxygen are considered chemical elements, but they're not considered fundamental elements of alchemy. Now, in an atomic view, they will tell you that water is made from hydrogen and oxygen, but in reality, hydrogen and oxygen are produced from water. We have to run electricity through water to produce hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen and oxygen are a product of human labor and alchemical transmutation. But you see, the atomists have flipped it on its head, and they're telling you that the water is made from hydrogen and oxygen. But I've never seen anybody make water from hydrogen and oxygen, and I've really looked into this, and there's some trickery involved, but nobody is making water from hydrogen and oxygen. It's so they've actually got it backwards. It's like water is the readily available, abundant element that we can all access, and we can use it to make hydrogen or oxygen. But it's incorrect to say that water is made from hydrogen and oxygen.
That makes sense, especially if you just wrap your head around the foundational idea that everything comes from these four elements. You know, we've been trained to think of it backwards, like fire comes from chemical combustion, but really, you know, fire is more original. We're just sort of we're bringing something out of the chemicals that is intrinsic to their nature rather than creating the fire out of them. Does that make sense? It's like these elements are the generative components.
So people often ask me this. They say fire is just a chemical reaction, but it's actually flames. Flames are a chemical reaction, but fire is the actual light itself. You know, in alchemy, it's the element that corresponds with like light and illumination, and electricity, and everything. But flames are a chemical reaction, right? There's something, you know, happening there, but not all fire is flames.
So back to the water. You mentioned in your book you don't think water can be created. You just touched on that. Mm-hmm. Does that mean you think there's a fixed amount of water in this terrarium Earth?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that just occurred to me really while I was writing the book. You know, a lot of stuff just comes to you while you're writing. But looking at the sort of terrarium model, and you know, thinking about that guy David Latimer, the guy who had the terrarium in 1960. And he closed it, and he opened it once to put some more water in 1972, put a little bit more water in it, and then closed it again. And it's still going. The plants are growing and thriving, right, with no air or water getting in or out. So that's, of course, called hermetically sealed. So hermetically sealed when no air or water can get in or out, but the light can get in and out. So the fire is able to penetrate through, but the air and the water and the earth can't get in or out. And I figured that's probably how the realm was made. It just seems to make the most sense. If I were a creator, I would make a realm with a roof on top of it. You know, the idea that there's no roof, right? Like in the globe Earth, there's no ceiling. It just goes on forever into distant space. It's just madness. So yeah, and then I figure, well, you wouldn't need to add more water in, but we do have this story of the flood, the ancient flood, where it is said that more water was added into the realm. But that was the only time it was ever done. And it was also, as we're told in the Bible, the last time God was ever going to do it, and made a promise not to do it again. So it is like that. It's like this David Latimer guy, right? There was a realm, it didn't need any more water, but they added some more in anyway. One time. so it's this nice sort of correspondence there.
Yeah, terrariums are a trip. I never really knew about them till recently. Started looking into that. Great sort of microcosmic model of what this place could be. I like that phrase better than snow globe anyway.
Snow globe, yeah.
But there's something that kind of really piques my interest. I have this device called an aquacure. It derives hydrogen out of water through electrolysis. Then you can inhale the hydrogen or bubble it into the water and drink the hydrogenated water. It's a potent nutrient, being so sort of simple and combustible as it is. And one thing about this device, and I've witnessed it myself, is that it generates over long-term use this sort of sludge. And the creator, George Wiseman, told me that he's had that sludge that kind of starts to gunk up the inside of the machine tested, and that in terms of its chemical components, it's the same as the components of the stainless steel plates that are used for the electrolysis process. Mm-hmm. But the plates never lose any weight, so it's not coming out of the plates. And as far as he can figure, it almost seems like the sludge is being generated ex nihilo. And he also thinks that new water is getting made by the electrolysis process. He may or may not be right of those assumptions, but when I've heard that and pondered on that, I've wondered about the ideas of the flood and the deluge event, and also mud floods, and the possibility that as a living organism, the earth itself might grow in some capacity. And electrolysis is kind of like a recharge, energetically. And so I've always likened it, if it's possible that some kind of large scale electrolysis event possibly leads to mud floods and growing earth and new water or deluges happening, that it's like metaphorically, it's God plugging in the construct to recharge it, you know, but all of that could just be way off base. And I wanted to know what that makes you think of, or if I'm barking up the wrong tree with these thoughts.
Well, no, I had there was a guy. Forgive me, I can't remember his name, but he was promoting this idea of primary water. He'd found these like sources of primary water throughout the world, and he was an expert in finding them. And he said these are areas where hydrogen gas and oxygen gas under the ground is like coming together under huge pressure and forming brand new water, which then shoots up and comes out the ground, and it's the best water you can get, whatever. And so it occurred to me that if new water was being created anywhere in the realm, then there would be a constant rising of the water levels in the ocean. Right? Because
and that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it clearly doesn't happen. So then you say, well, okay, well, if there's new water being created and the ocean levels never rise, then there must be a drain somewhere, a sink, like or like an overflow where old water flows out as the new water. It's the
edge of the pizza, the flat earth pizza. It's all, water falling off the edge into the void.
Yeah. And so anyway, I didn't think either of those scenarios were likely. I thought the most likely scenario was there's just a fixed amount of water in the realm. And that as well, because water is incompressible as well. It has no give at all. You can't compress it. You can't squeeze it by any amount. It's literally incompressible. So
that's interesting. I never thought about that.
Yeah. So there's just no way you could be adding more of it into the world without seeing a rise in the sea levels. In my view, in my opinion.
So in terms of my thought experiment, it would be a periodic event or very rare event. And maybe the sea levels do rise and things shift, but it'd be like sort of a big cataclysmic thing. That's all just fanciful, high octane speculation. But, we can go back into this next slide. I had to grab another graphic from your book because these are so useful. All right. We have the symbols, the classical symbols of the four elements. And you talk about how these symbols are divinely simple methods of communicating the essential behaviors in an accessible way. Can you give us the keys for interpreting these symbols that we've got on the screen?
Sure.
Helpful shorthand for comprehending the elements and their qualities.
Yes, I mean, I love these symbols. The upward triangles, of course, point up, and they point up because fire and air go up. They flow up. We know that heat rises, and air currents, of course, also rise. And both fire and air are in the upper half of our reality, right? It's like they're like above us. Whereas earth and water are below us, and they both flow down. So earth is below our feet, and water we go down to water, right? It's down to the shore. And water flows down, water falls down. Water and earth have gravity, right? If you want to use those terms, but fire and air defy gravity by going the other way. So there's also a gendered aspect to this as well. So the upward pointing triangle is symbolic of the phallus, because fire and air are masculine elements because they correspond with the sky, father sky, and the earth and water triangles are downward pointing, corresponding with the womb, as they are the components of Mother Earth. So they're also
phallus and the chalice.
Yes, yeah. And also three-pointed shapes, triangles, because there are three principles at the heart of this as well. So even though there's four elements, there's a threeness to each of the elements, which is why they're depicted as triangles. And then these other symbols, I actually just found online, just like clip art. I don't know who made them, but they're really nice as well, really divinely simple. So we see these kind of upward sine waves like S's, which look like, steam coming off of like a hot pie or something like that. And then for the air, we see these like strata, because air have these like different bands of different densities and so on. And then Earth, of course, looks like a mountain range, which would be earthy. And the water, of course, looks like water waves, and is, just like the fire waves, but on the other side, right? Because fire goes up and down, water is, side to side. It's a horizontal plane. So there's lots of nice, divinely simple qualities communicated through these symbols.
And our language is just riddled with reference to these elements. And we didn't even bring up the magical Western tradition and their correspondent elemental symbols, right? Fire with wands or staves, the air with swords, the earth with pentacles or discs or coins, and the water with cups or chalices. And it just dawned on me the other day. I thought about the word soar, like you're soaring through the air, and how similar that is to the word sword. It's basically sword without the D. If you're in the air, you're soaring. Yeah. And then fire, which is the other sort of upward element, it sears things, searing and soaring. There's like, the more you think about, you go crazy with language once you start opening the door to sounds like, is like. But I think that that's really fun. And is there anything else you want to tag onto that?
Yeah, like well, when I went to the States, I lived in the States for a couple of years, and I picked up a lot of the lingo there. And one of the things people would say a lot was stoked. Yeah, I'm stoked. And I just picked that up. I'm like, oh, I'm stoked. Every time I feel good, like something's good's happening to me, I'm like stoked. But of course, stoking is what you do to a fire, right? To actually help a fire to like burn brighter is to stoke it. And of course, people will say things like if something's good, if like an event was good, they will say it was lit, right? It was like lit, of course, another fire metaphor. There is loads. There's more that will come to me as well. But yeah, I started finding there is, or like buzzing, like you say like something's buzzing or something is a buzzkill. Buzzkill is really to like put out a fire, because a buzz is like a vibration. It's like you're getting something going, like, there's something buzzing, and then buzzkill will put it out. There's a lot of ways that that's in our language for sure.
And there's secret, like the Hulk, always being angry. I'm always stoked. That's my secret. Yeah. Okay. So on the subject of the earth element, I thought it was interesting how you list the quality, along with memory being associated with water, which I think we've talked about at length with researchers like Veda Austin. And I'm happy for you to comment on that too. But I never thought to consider the concept of fractality itself to be an aspect of the earth element, structure. Can you talk about that stuff?
Yeah, sure. So, the earth element, the fractal nature of earth was what inspired the whole Mandelbrot fractal. I think it's on Netflix actually. There's a short documentary about the Mandelbrot fractal and how he came up with the equation. And he was studying roughness. And he called it like the property of roughness, right? Because everything in math is like idealistically smooth. It's like perfect, platonic solids, perfect spheres, all this kind of thing. And he was obsessed with the idea of roughness. But actually, roughness is uniquely a quality of the earth element. Right? There's no roughness in water. There's no roughness in air. There's no roughness in fire. It's uniquely earth. And so by looking at earth, looking at rocks, he noticed that they look the same at all different scales of reality. And so one example might be if you look at a rocky mountain, and then if you take like a small rock from the beach and look at it under a microscope, it can look exactly the same as a distant mountain, or the same like a pile of earth in your hand. There's no scale to it. A small bit of dirt looks the same as a big bit of dirt. A small rock looks the same as a big rock. And that's true all the way down. And that fits with what Aristotle's saying about matter being continuous and having no smallest pieces, but actually just being divisible all the way down. And so that's what fractal means. It means that it's its general appearance is independent of scale.
And it seems like a defining characteristic of the material world.
Yeah.
But I also think that that's such an important concept in alchemy, with the idea of as above, so below. But is there a difference between as below, so, as above, so below, as within, so without? Is there a difference between that and the idea of fractality, or a distinction, nuance there?
Yeah, it is kind of like that. Yeah, fractality. Yeah, so as above, so below. You go to a smaller scale, and it looks similar to how it did at the bigger scale. Maybe not identical, but similar. There's correspondence. Yeah, I mean that's actually it's like as above, so below, all the way down.
Yeah, as within, so without, or it's actually something like from the inward doth the outward roll. And that's actually a distinction that is not usually brought up, but to me, that's super important because it implies a directionality to it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any directionality to the above and below? I'm not sure. That's almost like a mirror, but the inward to the outward, there's clearly a directionality indicated by the maxim, which is important because otherwise it's left up to the individual, and people still can decide for themselves, but whether or not, life is happening to them or they're happening to life. But I think it's one of the most important things about your alchemical process, mentally or spiritually, is to get that order correct.
Yeah, well, it really does start within, though, doesn't it? I mean, even though we're sort of inside something bigger. I mean, I would say it was a vortex within a vortex, right? We have a vortex in us, but we're obviously inside of a much larger vortex as well. But perhaps because there are these, we're all connected to the same vortex that it does flow from the in into the out, and I mean, I certainly live my life by that way, from the inside to the out. Yeah. Although I'm not saying that the external world doesn't exist or that I'm generating it, though. I do believe in the elements, actually. People have asked me about this. Do I think it's a simulation or a hallucination? Is everything like not real or just in the brain or whatever? But no, I actually think the elements are objectively real. I think fire, earth, air, and water are there and it will still be here even after I disappear. I think that's the environment that we're in,
Totally. And that's the belief of the ancients as well. And in fact, the word materialism, before it got the modern connotation of like, there's nothing but matter, which is silly. Like everything, their scientific principles are sort of bastardized ripoffs of ancient mystery school concepts. But materialism actually meant that the belief or the assertion that matter itself is eternal, that matter has always existed, that doesn't have a temporal aspect to it. The material of the universe just always was, always will be. And then the mind, or the nous, or the great soul of the world, the architect of the cosmos, demiurgos, what have you, not in a negative sense, was the ordering consciousness that turns the matter from a chaotic, disorganized state into an orderly world that we see today. But because of the eternality of matter being a divine attribute, eternality is a divine attribute, then matter itself was thought to have a divinity to it. And that's where we get sort of this idea of the androgyne god, that the earth itself is the Adam Kadmon, or the body of the goddess or the god. And the mind is what shapes and generates things out of that earth, not just the earth, but the earth and all of the constituent elements that exist upon the realm.
Yeah. So one of the things Aristotle talked about, and this was a fairly new term to me recently, is hylomorphism. In other words, he said that this was a hylo meaning matter and morpha meaning form. He's saying that all things are made from matter and form. So that there's a substance, and then the substance is given form. And he would say that was that's what everything is composed of, not atoms and molecules. You see, we've gone from that kind of qualitative view of matter and form to this quantitative view of everything's made from a certain number of of atoms, a certain number of electrons, and all this kind of thing. It's just gone full like mathematical overload, I think, with the science of formalism, they would call it, just like, loads and loads of equations and analysis and counting this and calculating that, and it's just gone absolutely wild. But when you just come back to like the properties of the elements, there's something just very grounding. It just speaks to you in a way that you can understand and use.
I love it. And I just can't imagine being one of those people that actually argues on the side of their consciousness being an illusion and not existing. Like the Sam Harris's or whatever. What does that feel like? Can you really possibly believe what you're saying? Is it just sort of like poisoning the well? I don't know. But I think this question will kind of spiral. But I wanted to get it into the first half. And we have maybe more things to say about the elements in the second half. But where does someone start with gaining alchemical knowledge and making it something more than just philosophical theory? Is that something you can speak on?
Well, I mean, I always just say, come back to, understanding the elements, how they work in your own life and in your own body. Again, the human body is, that's where we're at, right? It's the center of our existence. The human body is an incredibly complicated thing to understand if you're looking at it in terms of atoms. In fact, even incredibly complicated to understand if you're thinking of it in terms of cells, like cellular biology. But when you actually think of it in terms of fire, earth, air, and water, it becomes a lot more simple to understand. And, this is just like, it's awesome. I feel so much more secure in my body now that I understand fire, earth, air, and water than I did when I was, an atomic theorist or whatever. The body felt incredibly unstable. Like I was imagining trillions upon trillions of atoms of all different kinds, all hung together by invisible forces. And that is my body. If something goes wrong, like if you have a pain somewhere, you're like, what is, what's going on? Have I lost some atoms? Have some of the atoms fallen apart, or did the molecules break? How am I going to fix the molecules? It's just a problem that is just impossible.
Oh no, I must be low on pharmaceutical chemicals.
Yeah. It's just crazy to think of yourself as consisting of atoms. You can't fix anything. But then when you break it down to fire, earth, air, and water, things are quite simple. Like inflammation is fire. Inflammation is like excess of heat or friction, or something like that. And the body is the fire element, basically. So you would combat that with the water element, something cooling or moistening. And things. A lot of the problems with the body are just due to impure waters. Right? It's just like you've just been, your waters have gotten impure and they need to be purified, right? So yeah, it makes disease and everything a lot more easy to grasp when you're not thinking about it in terms of atoms, molecules, and cells and all this kind of stuff, but just the elements.
It's true, and it's, I think, kind of requires your own pondering and epiphanies. But if you have this framework and you apply it wherever possible to what you feel is out of balance for yourself, like say you're feeling really unstable, shaky, like, well, you might call that state being ungrounded, and you might go lay down on the earth or hug a tree and touch the ground physically and find that rectifies the instability feeling.
Yeah.
And if you can just take that to whatever extent you feel like out of whack and think about it from an elemental sense and just try to apply the opposite, as you say precisely in the book, healing happens when you stop taking the action that's causing the pain and balance it out with the opposing qualities. Yeah. We should view symptoms as signs or messengers that are communicating to us where we need to adjust our lifestyle. And I think that's the life-changing aspect here.
Signs, right? You got SIGN, but also SINE, which is sign, the mathematical sign function, which is sin, is like religious sin, right? And it's like, it's the same thing. It's like when we sin, there's a straight and narrow path, which would be like the x-axis. So when we sin, we deviate from the path. And it's like we would come to a certain, we might come to a certain limit where we can only go so far, and then we have to turn back, and then we sort of have to then pay the price for our sins, whether that involves like getting sick or whatever, like swinging back the other way. But so it's the same with healing in medicine. It's like if we've sinned, if you like, by doing something that's causing us to gain lots of inflammation, we then stop taking the action, so it will naturally start going the other way. But there will be a process of going the other way and coming back again, right? You're going to have to go through a whole process to undo the sin. And so medicine is medi-sin, right? Which medi means to bring something to the center. So it's like the sin is wiggling away from the center, right? And the medi-sin is to like mediate the sin and like bring it back to the center. And that should be what medicine does. It's essentially, right. You've taken some action. It's now made you ill, and the medicine should bring you back to center again. That's what you want from it,
Yeah, I got out of balance pretty severely for a while with like caffeine and coffee consumption, and it becomes taxing on your adrenals, and it's sort of, you get into this mindset where you're like, well, I need more of it because I'm feeling exhausted. So, and the thing you're afraid of is feeling like too tired or not sharp or alert enough. But my chiropractor was like, you need to drink chamomile. Whenever you're in that state in the afternoon and you're thinking you're not focused or sharp or alert enough to do what you need to do, don't grab coffee, grab chamomile. The thing that you're afraid of is actually the cure to your condition, and like that ended up being absolutely correct. I needed to balance out the extreme with the opposite quality, something calming and relaxing. And that totally did the trick. I mean, I'm still sort of going through a healing process to damage I did with that, but the calming and relaxing herbs and plants are my greatest healers through that. So it's a great example, a little confession.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I gave up coffee last year as well, probably about 6 months ago.
I haven't gave it up, but I've given it up after 12 p.m.
Yeah, well, that's good as well. Yeah,
and I mean, half coffee now.
I just gave it up because I felt like it was giving me anxiety, and yeah, I might be drinking like 4 cups a day or something. And yeah, I was just getting like chest, just like issues in my chest and stuff where there would just be like this tightness and stuff. Anyway, I gave it up. I don't really miss it anymore, to be honest. I mean, I had like 35 years drinking every day or something. It was plenty, it was enough.
Yeah, that's always the thing you can ask yourself with something like that's maybe an addictive consumption, and just like, when is it? When have I had enough sodas for a lifetime? Like I remember asking myself that years back when I quit drinking soda, like, have I had enough? Like when I tally it all at the end, was that enough soda? I think so. But I wanted to, as we're wrapping up the first hour, I just really wanted to touch on what you had said a little while back regarding how adrift you felt in the world of atomism, especially with somebody that had the education background. As they say, especially with complicated subjects, the more you know that you don't know. And that's certainly true with things that are built on erroneous foundations and spiraling into absolute chaos of knowledge, just, pseudo knowledge systems. And I think of the elements and their quaternity and that relationship to the symbol of the cross, and how the symbol of the cross is also mirrored, and in some usages, like in the Greek Orthodox Church, is mirrored by the symbol of the anchor. And they'll even depict Jesus on an anchor rather than on the traditional crucifix. And it's true because this notion of the elements being your foundational principle, how you see the lens through which you see the world, it really does anchor you. It gives you something stable. There's a real stability. I mean, that's what the number 4 kind of represents, is stability. And I just appreciate that we were able to go through these subjects in the first hour and what we'll talk about in the second hour. And hopefully we've helped somebody out there find an anchor in the chaos of modernity.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, number 4 is the number of stability. That's right. And those 4 elements just have you'll find you can explain everything with them. There's nothing you can't explain. Yeah, and when you try to explain things in complex theoretical terms, it might seem like it's very fuzzy, and you're kind of reaching a bit to like use other people's terminology to explain things. But once you understand the elements, you don't have to use anybody else's terminology. You can just explain things in terms of everyday like words that everybody knows, right? Because everything in creation has a name. The theoretical stuff is all has to be given a new name. It's like a synthetic language. Quantum physics and atomism is like a synthetic language. It's names for things that don't exist, or that are just quantities and not actual qualities.
I heard it said once that the fall of man, like the fall of Lucifer, was when mankind started thinking of number as quantitative rather than qualitative, like strictly quantitative. And that sort of applies to, across the board, just making quantity over quality across the board. I think there's really something to that.
Yeah, I mean, with like Descartes and all this like scientific revolution, Enlightenment period, that is one of the major like flips that happened in the consciousness, was they decided qualities are not real any longer. It's quantities that are real. So, when you see something red, you're not actually seeing something red, right? Like the redness isn't real. It's an illusion created in your brain from the quantity of frequency going into your eye. Yeah, so they flipped it around. Qualities are not real, quantities are real, and then that's the rest is history, right?
Yeah, and just wrap that up. It's obviously an inversion because quantity is relative and subjective. You've got 5 apples in front of you, but that doesn't mean that the number 5 actually exists outside of an abstract, or that there aren't infinite more apples elsewhere. There's not actually only 5. You know what I mean? Like a quantity thing, it's useful for commerce.
Yeah.
And that bridges into a whole other subject, but how all of this inversion is related to the commercialization of mankind. But we'll cut it off here. I want to give you a chance to give closing thoughts to the free hour, let people know where they can find you, what's new with you, what they can, expect on the horizon, all the plugs. We've got so much going on.
Oh, thank you. Well, off to a good start this year. I've got a bunch of presentations coming up, so I'm working on a lot of new keynote material at the moment. I'm going to have like a sort of master slide deck of about 150 slides, covering not only stuff that's in the book, but lots of new research that I've done in recent months. And I'm going to be presenting those at some private events over the next few weeks, but then I'm going to put it together into a video, which I will make available through my website and stuff. So my website is stephenyoung.uk, and you can find all my links on there.
And the music?
The music, yeah. Well, last year I had a little bit of a break from the music. Obviously, I wrote a book instead of my usual music making schedule. I do have some music I'm going to release this year. It's already finished. I've been sitting on it for a while. Some new remixes with vocals and stuff. So really good stuff. I'm going to put out soon, I promise.
And they find that at Hedflux, Hedflux.
Yeah, hedflux.com.
Yeah. On Spotify, on all the stuff. Go get it. Listen to it. Enjoy it. All right, Steve. Well, we'll see you on the other side. It's been an excellent first half. Looking forward to picking up where we left off.
Likewise.
Now, that is what I'm talking about. This is a home run quality episode. Couldn't have done it without, of course, the great and exalted Stephen Young, PhD, aka Hedflux. I love talking to that guy. It doesn't hurt to know that he's been an InnerVerse listener in and out for a while too. So I feel like we got the best audience, and probably there's dozens, if not, who knows, 100 or more of you out there that aren't content creators, but that do tune in, who I could have as good or better conversation with. So that just really speaks to the quality of our entire vibe here. Like I said, it's you as much as it is this channel, but I do my best. If you guys enjoyed this first hour talking to Steve about the elements, you got to get into the esoteric end with the episode extension, where we talked about, well, we actually spent quite a while decoding one of the many enigmatic alchemical drawings that they have out there from the Middle Ages. And you can look this one up. It's called The Medicine to Cure Fantasy and Purging Folly with Drugs. It's as good as it sounds. There was a lot to mine out of that particular image. They say an image is worth 1,000 words. Well, an alchemical image is worth all the words, millions of words. And we discussed the mystical potency of sage, the plant, drugs as purified salts, and salts as qualities of the soul. We made an attempt to penetrate the esoteric defenses of alchemical writing, or at least have some understanding of how to get around those defenses. The 3 levels of the great work were discussed: the physical, theoretical, and philosophical, such as philosophical Mercury or a philosophical month, part of the esoteric defenses of alchemical writing. We discussed alchemical immortality and the subjugating of time. This all fell into the qualitative versus quantitative thread or pattern in the conversation that came through with the elemental discussion. We talked about the qualities, the strange qualities of Mercury and esoteric metallurgy. Why does Mercury dissolve all metals except iron? And then we rounded it all out with a great little weave on alchemical antiquitech, some of the ways that our forebearers who constructed these many great works of architecture might have been using alchemical principles and the elemental knowledge to illuminate, to electrify, to do things that we can't even quite see the traces of because we don't have the lens to look for it. And by we, I mean society at large. Obviously, we are seeing traces of it, people like Steve. So, excellent conversation. You know what to do. Get into the second hour by becoming a member on Patreon or Rockfin. As always, Patreon's going to be the best bet. It's the cheapest bet. It's the one that I get the best cut from. And it's the one that has my content going back to the beginning of forever. You know, Rockfin's cool, though, if you want to get the whole network of creators and their premium content, go for it. Not going to hurt my feelings which one you choose. I'm a little mad at YouTube. I do have a YouTube channel membership subscription option, which I think I need to actually do a little self-censorship in this episode in the second hour, if this one's even going to go on YouTube for the YouTube members. Sorry, y'all. But my previous episode with the ghost Dr. Chris got me a 2-week ban, and it was in the members only section and wasn't even in the public. Obviously, I can't repeat what I said there if I want to avoid getting strike 2, but hey, I didn't build the platform. Unfortunately, they get to decide the rules, even if they are quite silly. So, you know, get into the Patreon side of stuff if you really want to support me. And I know Patreon's not the best platform either in terms of censorship. They've got a bad track record too, but we're making do with what we can. And until I get enough of y'all members to fund my reconstruction of my website to have a members section and host all this stuff myself, which I would do once I had the resources, we got to work with what we have available. And I think that we're all clever enough to use our code words and kind of outsmart the algorithms, right? It's not that hard. Speaking of algorithms and YouTube, if you do watch my content there, you'll probably notice a bit of a re-strategizing of how my thumbnails and my titles look. I'm kind of just at this point tired of this incredible timeless content filled with the wisdom of the ages, not really getting noticed by many people. So I'm going to do my best to get myself in alignment with best practices for optimizing the way that my content interacts with the algorithm and attracts people. Now, it's ironic that I would talk about that in an episode where quality over quantity was so heavily emphasized. But hey, I'm a bothist. Why can't we have quality and quantity? I'd like to get the entire quantity of quality people that would like this stuff to be on it. So, you know what? At the end of the day, the best way for this podcast to grow is for you listening to share it with even just one person who you know would resonate with the message, with the knowledge, with the vibe. I think the vibe and the energy is the most important part. Otherwise, you know what? Things are great as they are, but I want to keep myself on a growth trajectory. And so there is some new strategy around that. And I don't even know why I need to announce it, but it's what's on my mind currently. Now, there's so much with Steve that we didn't talk about from the notes I have out of his book. And in fact, most of our conversation was derived from one chapter of that book. So go get that book. You'll really like it. How can you not? If you didn't listen to the first time with Steve, go back and listen to that too. We just completely demolished the Tower of Babel of scientism. Some points from the book that I thought were worth bringing up is the word alchemy and the etymology that he dissects out of it with al and kimia, the Arabic word for to pour or to fuse or to cast, as in metallurgy, smelting and alloying of metals. It's where we get the term chemistry, chemia. Now, I'd always heard alchemy given its word origin to Kemet, the name for Egypt, referring to black, like the black god. And I think that there can be dual etymological origins for a word. That's what synchromysticism is all about. But in terms of this idea of Al being God and fusing with Chemia, that makes a lot of sense because it's basically the same meaning as the word yoga out of India. It's like yoking yourself to God. Yoke, you see the GK swap there. So that worked really well. I liked that piece of knowledge. Was surprised I hadn't come across it yet. But alchemy hasn't been my primary realm of study yet. I'm definitely branching more into it and looking forward to doing more conversations with Steve as I do branch further into alchemy. Especially appreciate this one, though, because it really demonstrates what a fantastic framework of universal correspondences the elements really are. We could go on and on about that. He points out in the book how the five senses correlate to the quintessential elements. You have sight for fire or light. Light and fire are the same thing. Smell for air, taste for water, touch for earth, and hearing for spirit or ether, which I think is pretty cool because that's like, sound is the first thing in most cosmologies. So of course that would correlate to ether or spirit. Our spirit has a sound. It's like music. That's pretty beautiful. I also liked how he demonstrated with a neat little chart in the elements chapter that all the ways in which we generate power are connected to one of the four physical elements. So you have solar cells, solar power, thermal plants, etc. Those are fire. You got windmills, gas combustion, atmospheric electricity, storm power. Those are all air. With water, you have, tides and currents and how those power turbines, and steam power could be water. With earth, you have all the combustibles that are physical, like physical fuels, coal, wood, oil, geothermal, magnets, magnetic energy, heat pumps. There's some overlap with this, but you see how you really can't get away from these four elements when you're talking about power. And it does make sense that they're the power of our cosmos. They power it all. They're the foundations of it all. I really liked the part in the plus extension too about the salt representing qualities of the soul. And that all came out of us discussing that image, the medicine to cure fantasy and purging folly with drugs. And I've heard it said that the human body is the ultimate alchemical laboratory. So maybe enlightenment is really about getting the proper mixture of salts in your soul, like all of the aspects of soul in the proper mixture of your own inner self essence is what leads you to the completion of enlightenment. Although that's not really, described as completion. It's more of a continuing process, but you get it. I think that there's a there. And maybe that understanding of salts and soul qualities, and salts as the active ingredient of any medicine or drug, maybe that helps us start to comprehend why the physical work in the laboratory was always a mirror to the spiritual development of the being, and that the alchemists would describe the laboratory work, but be talking about the spiritual work, and they kind of go hand in hand. I don't know. I can't tell you the answer if you need to get a lab and start doing decoctions and what's it? Let me read this quote. This is from Paracelsus. First of all, Then there must be learnt digestions, distillations, sublimations, reverberations, extractions, solutions, coagulations, fermentations, fixations, and every instrument which is requisite for this work must be mastered by experience, such as glass vessels, cucurbites, circulators, vessels of Hermes, earthen vessels, baths, blast furnaces, reverberatories, and instruments of the like, also marble, coal, and tongs. Thus, at length, you will be able to profit in alchemy and medicine. Wow, sounds like a lot of work. Did he mean that literally? I don't know. Some people will tell you, yes, you do need the lab to really get the most out of alchemy, to really fuse with God. I don't know. But if I had the space for it, maybe I'd set up a lab someday. That'd be fun. Let me know if it works for you, if you've got an alchemical laboratory. The only person I ever knew that did was really just making high potency marijuana extractions and calling it alchemy. So I'd like to know if there's more to it than that. But this was a blast. Loved Steve. Loved everything about how deep we were able to go into the element conversation. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Hope you guys go find his YouTube channel or buy his book or both. Or at the very least, because it's free, listen to Hedflux on, Spotify or wherever you might pick it up. It's so good. It's my style of music that I prefer too, like really heady, complex electronic music. So I'm into it. With that, I guess I should remind you, there's a lot of ways you can support InnerVerse besides becoming a Plus member on Patreon and the other platforms. Go to the show notes for links to that. Clive DeCarl, Tippecanoe Herbs. Both of those are places where you can use my code or my link to get some good supplements for your bodily alchemical laboratory, right? And that gives me a kickback. Very nice. The flower essences from Lotus Way are also very nice. I just took some of those. And last, but certainly not least, there's biofield tuning with yours truly. And that tends to be booked out 4 to 6 weeks in advance. So if it's something you're interested in doing, and you think that it's going to be like you book as soon as you pay me, be aware there's a little bit of a lag. So if you want it sooner than later, if you have a certain date that you're trying to astrologically align a healing ceremony to, you might want to get on the calendar early so that you don't miss that date. Not that it matters. I'm not trying to, this sounds like high pressure sales. How dare me? Whenever you do it is fine, or don't do it. Also fine. But there's enough of you that are doing it that it's keeping me busy and supported, helping me support my family, which I love. I appreciate. I look forward to the next time we all get to meet like this. I've got solid 2 months worth of shows mapped out. It's been a while since I was that far ahead. Speaking of planning ahead, and they're all gravy to the max, gravy overload. So, and about the 2-week banning, you might want to find the backup channel for InnerVerse on YouTube if you do watch there, because I'm going to start doing both channels in tandem. I guess that's dangerous still. If one gets wiped out, the other one will. But the new one's only on 0 strikes. Anyway, thinking out loud. But there is a backup channel. And I love you guys. Catch you later. Have a good one. Enjoy the wrap up of Capricorn season. I know I will. I'll talk to you soon.